The massacre at the Taylor Swift-themed dance class in Southport will be among the darkest chapters of recent British history. And on the 29th of July 2024, Axel Rudakubana murdered three young girls, Baby King, Elsie Stankham, and Alice de Silva Aguirre. And he attempted to kill 10 others in an act of unimaginable violence and brutality and savagery and thoughtlessness. And the events left a town and a nation reeling with profound questions about how such a tragedy could ever occur. And central to this atrocity is the failure of Prevent, the government's self-styled anti-extremist program that failed absolutely. And Rudakubana was referred to Prevent 3 times over 17 months because of his fixation with violence, yet no intervention considered him to be a significant threat. Nothing was done. This oversight, compounded by failures in other agencies, allowed his escalating radicalization to go unchecked, and police have been called to his home multiple times. Teachers have reported his violent tendencies, and despite these red flags, the dots were never connected. Because these organizations seem to want one particular formula rather than to respond to the reality as it presents itself. And that is the problem. And the same issue, by the way, is present with the far right. They want one particular formula. They want Rudakubana to be identified as an Islamic terrorist, and that almost certainly is not the case. Prime Minister Sir Keir Starmer has rightly called for an inquiry, describing the failure to prevent this attack as leaping off the page. He's also highlighted a critical evolution in the nature of terrorism, shifting from organised groups like Al-Qaeda to self-radicalised lonely misfits enabled by unregulated online content. And this new group, this new threat, requires a more comprehensive overhaul of how extremism is identified and addressed. And in the middle of this national trauma, a tide of disinformation muddied public understanding and continues in its self-importance. The viral claims that Rudakubana was a Muslim asylum seeker, rubbish. Despite being a British-born autistic teenager, fueled riots across the UK, spurred by fake media narratives, spurred by fake social media, led by widespread violence, hundreds of arrests, further communities suffering, goaded by senior politicians and specific media personalities, Tommy Robinson, Andrew Tate, Farage. Equally damaging were the false allegations linking Starmer to the attack. The baseless claim that the Prime Minister represented Rudakubana's father in an asylum case has circulated widely, despite being categorically untrue. These rumours have done little but embolden figures like Farage, who use these tragedies to stoke fear, division, and their own political agenda. The true scandal here is not a government cover-up, but the failures of our systems to deal with reality. If it doesn't fit into the tidy box of what is expected, it's ignored. Contempt of court laws prevented public disclosure of Rudakubana's Prevent referrals and his possession of ricin and of terrorist materials. This wasn't an act of concealment, but of legal obligation to ensure a fair trial. Nonetheless, the delay in addressing these failures gave space for conspiracies to flourish, amplified by the twits with a voice. And chief of those is Farage. Figures like Farage, who perpetuated these narratives by asking questions. They've undermined the trust in institutions. They've worsened community tensions. I'm not shallow. Well, I'm afraid that's not true. This tragedy needs to be seen as a line in the sand. The inquiry must scrutinise prevents failures, how agencies coordinate in cases of escalating risk, and the accessibility of violent online content. And Starmer's proposal to redefine terrorism to include such acts of individual violence is absolutely necessary. Terrorism isn't about what is the intention of the terrorist. Terrorism is about how the events, how the experiences are understood by society. Beyond rhetoric, there must be action on regulating online platforms, reforming anti-terror frameworks, improving mental health support for vulnerable individuals, and ensuring that organisations like Prevent actually do their work. The grief of the families, the devastation of Southport's community must not be overshadowed by political gamesmanship. And the families grieving, that's a very wide remit, isn't it? I'm sure rudakubana's family is as grief-stricken as many of the families looking on in horror at what this foolish individual has done. And why wasn't he stopped? If the problems had been flagged up, why did the system not work? We need to honour the memory of the little girls, of Bebby, of Elsie, of Alice, by demanding changes in the system, by demanding that the system works. It isn't a partisan issue, but a moral imperative. And as the Prime Minister said, we cannot shrug our shoulders and accept that this is just the way things are. We have to ensure that these innocent lives, tragically taken, are the catalyst for a safer and more just society. And the tragedy's gravity must be matched by appropriate and compelling criticism of the institutional failings and the harmful role played by disinformation and those people spreading that disinformation. The importance of establishing reforms to prevent future atrocities need to be at the top of the list. And we need to look forward to practical solutions and practical measures to be put in place to ensure that young lives are not put at risk in the future.